and just want to welcome everyone. Good morning and welcome to our second Reshaping Church conversation of 2021. Go ahead and if you would, just introduce yourself in the chat, who you are, where you are, your place of ministry. We'd ask throughout that there will be some times for interaction, but as long as you're not speaking, if you would go ahead and keep your microphone muted just to cut down on some of the background noise. So the Reshaping Church conversations we started last month, and these will run through the month of November, and they're part of a larger program that's being administered by Central Seminary in partnership with Pinnacle Leadership Associates called Reshaping Church. Reshaping Church is a guided process for capturing and integrating the innovation and adaptation resulting from disruptive life experiences, transforming churches into greater expressions of the body of Christ. And we have quite a few folks joining us today who are part of congregations that are moving through the Reshaping Church process in 2021. This process emerged out of the innovation and adaptation that churches implemented when COVID-19 interrupted our lives and our ministries. And it's a process of congregational discernment for moving forward out of such crises. And so we know that COVID-19 continues to affect our lives and our congregations. And so this process continues to be relevant because we know that the world is being changed. And as faithful followers of Christ, we must be discerning God's calling for our ministries in this new time. So we currently have 10 congregations engaged in 2021 Reshaping Church cohort. And they are currently in a stage of a process where they are developing and implementing their next step ministry plans and have access to up to $5,000 in grant funds available for them to implement those ministry plans. So if that process and those funds sound like something that might be helpful for your congregation, we're currently recruiting for our 2022 Reshaping Church cohort. We have a number of Zoom open houses scheduled in the next couple of weeks where you can learn more about the process, or if you know of other congregations that would be interested in this kind of process that you'd like to recommend, I'll drop a link here in the chat that includes more information about Reshaping Church and the registration links for those open houses. Also on that link is the reason that you're all here today. That link includes some resources that will be used in today's conversation on adaptive leadership in times of crisis, and will be led by Reverend Dr. Jeff Woods, who's currently serving as Interim General Secretary for the American Baptist Churches USA. So would you please join me in welcoming Dr. Woods as he leads us in our exploration today of adaptive leadership in times of crisis.
Good morning. It is good to see some familiar faces, and it is always good to meet new persons as well. This is my favorite type of conversation to have, conversation about congregations and how those congregations can better advance God's work in the world, be a part of their community, and adapt as they need to do so. I'm delighted to be with you this morning and would like to jump right in, if that's okay. I appreciate seeing the words in the chat, identifying yourself and your organization. That's very helpful to know who we're with today. I view organizations and institutions typically as an entity that has a personality, that has a past and a future, and that in many ways operates much like an organism, much like an organism that is alive and functioning, sometimes well, sometimes not so well. And with that, then sometimes I think it's helpful to use illustrations or examples of individuals and apply those examples to institutions, since we're thinking about institutions as living organisms. So I'd like to begin that way to introduce the topic today of adaptive change. I need a volunteer, and as I look out, I thank Dan Chadwick for volunteering for the next few moments to have a conversation with me. Dan, this is one of those times I think where everyone else took a step back and you were suddenly in the front. So if you don't mind unmuting and let's have a conversation. So Dan, imagine that this is an in-person meeting rather than an online meeting, and we're meeting for a couple of days, and you come to me during a break and tell me you have some news to share with me, that you talked to your doctor last week, and your doctor said, there are some heart concerns and nothing major, but you probably need 12 bypass surgery. And I respond and say, well, Dan, I'm a doctor, so, why don't we just, we're here for a couple of days. I'm sure we can find an empty room at the seminary. Why don't we just take care of this? I'll do the bypasses for you. How would you respond to that?
With hesitancy. There's a lot of kinds of doctors, so yeah.
Okay, so you would like a different kind of doctor to do this?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so.
Okay, well, I actually have a friend who's a medical doctor, a surgeon. Gallbladders is really his thing, but he has always wanted to do a heart surgery, and he would give you a really good discount. I could get him here, this week. He could do, the surgery. He's a medical doctor. How does that sound?
I'm sure he really wants to do this, and I'm sure the price is great, but with a 12 bypass surgery thing coming up, I think I'd like to have somebody that is used to doing those kind of things.
So a heart surgeon. Okay.
Yeah, that might be a good idea.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't know one, but I know, prices still are concern. What if the heart surgeon comes in and says, first time for everything. I'm certified to do this, but I'm so looking forward to having my first surgery with you today.
I'd rather have somebody that's a little bit more experienced and has done this kind of thing a few times.
Well, you really are pretty picky,
Yeah, we're talking about my heart here. Yeah.
Well, I know, but still, I may not be able to get you a discount anymore. But so let's imagine then that, you have this expensive surgery and everything goes well with that. And then in a few months, you see your GP, your family doctor, and the family doctor said, good news, everything really went well. But I do want to have a couple of other conversations with you. There are reasons how you got in this shape to begin with. And there really needs to be perhaps some changes in lifestyle for you. Can you think of anything that could be done, to improve lifestyle?
Yeah. Eating habits, not smoking a pipe, a little bit more exercise on a regular basis throughout the year.
Okay, sure. That makes sense. I can set you up then with a nutritionist for, eating habits, and maybe a physical therapist or someone, who can help with exercise routine, that you could design yourself. So let's say that happens, and now we're a year down the road and we're doing those tests, medical tests, monitoring, and we discover that things have improved, but not all the way. And so now the doctor says, there's probably one more type of source that's influencing your heart. This may be more difficult to get a handle on. Can you think of anything else that influences your healthy heart that's going on in your workplace, other places?
Well, stress might be a factor.
Sure. So then let's set out to explore the stress in your life. Thank you, Dan. You've been great. And I hope you don't need, ever need that kind of surgery. And if you do, don't call me for that. So thank you for this conversation. What we have just demonstrated really in the last few moments are 3 different types of change that an individual goes through. And these 3 types of change are changes that organizations then are involved in as well. The first type of change is called technical. So as Dan and I were talking about bringing in someone to help with the technical change, that would be the example of the heart surgeon that would do this. So the primary aspect of technical change is that an individual does this for the organization. The organization really doesn't do this themselves. Sometimes we mistakenly think that technical change is simple or it's easy. That's why I like to use the example of a heart surgeon, that it's something that often is not simple, but it is something that can be done with some steps. We know who to call. We have a conversation. The heart surgeon, may have 2 or 3 of these in a particular day. So it's something, that can take place relatively quickly in terms of providing a fix for the organization, for the individual. Hopefully that part makes sense in terms of technical assistance that organizations may need. The second type is strategic change that organizations go through. The big difference here, and this would be an example of diet and exercise. And again, Dan, thank you for playing along with this. I'm sure you have a very healthy lifestyle, but I'm sure all of us could probably, improve in those 2 ways, that we're probably no one perfect in those. But big difference then in terms of technical and strategic is that now you're really in charge. I don't know if others can kind of see the difference, that if you meet with that nutritionist, you meet with that exercise coach, they may make some suggestions, but you are really the one, following these steps, carrying out these steps, even really kind of designing, this plan, so that it's not the expert from the outside or even an expert within the organization, though, that's doing the work, for you. You're now the one doing the work. So that's the big difference between technical and strategic, is that you are in charge of the work, or the institution, as we talk about adaptive change, is really in charge of their own strategic plan, if you will, getting from point A to point B, designing steps for that. The third type of change that we talked about is stress for an individual, and that would be the type of change that is adaptive change for an organization. The big shift here is that we really don't know where to start. You see the difference between stress and strategic change, stress and exercise. If you design an exercise plan on Monday, you potentially are making progress with that and seeing signs of progress within the first week or 2. Or with adaptive change, it may take us a few months to really even know what we're dealing with. And the kind of activities that we do with adaptive change are always to discover more about the issue. And that's one of the hardest things, that it just does not come naturally in thinking about this. People often, think about strategic change versus adaptive change, and they come up with examples. And so one of my first question is, with their potential activities, will this potentially solve the problem for you? If the answer is yes, this is probably not an adaptive challenge. It is probably something strategic that you are, you may it may take a few attempts, at something that really works. You may try one diet, have to go to another, but the whole idea is with the activity is to solve it. Whereas with adaptive change, often some of the best first activities are to interview some people, to get some more information about the issue that you're talking about. Probably my favorite activity to suggest when you're dealing with an adaptive change is to take a field trip. As you can see, that field trip will not solve the issue. It will yield information, create fodder for discussion, give you insight, hopefully, into the challenge that you are experiencing. I'll pause there. I'll say a little more about the difference between technical and adaptive. And in a moment, Jessica, I'll be referring to that chart of technical versus adaptive. But I'll pause there and see if there are any questions or comments. Okay, good. Let's continue then. And if you have access to the chart that at the top, and great, Jessica's going to share it. So I'd like to walk us through this. Each row of this particular chart shares a difference between technical and adaptive. Thank you for enlarging that, Jessica. My understanding is that sometimes persons can right click also and make it larger on their own screen. And if you need your reading glasses, I will appreciate the company if you choose to wear those. So again, each row shows a difference between technical and adaptive. So we'll just walk our way through this. When we think about, okay, we need to do something, with technical change, typically we say, well, we need to ask a plumber to come and fix this leak. We need to find someone with experience in a website that knows how to design websites to come and do this for us. Examples of technical change. Examples of adaptive change that would finish the sentence, we need to, would be, we need to talk to someone about this. We need to learn more about this. We need to be in prayer about this because it's really difficult to exactly define what we're dealing with in this moment. The solutions then, in terms of technical, are typically known. As we think about the heart surgeon, again, it's not something that I can do, but it is a known process for the individual who is doing it. There are steps that can be taken to solve the issue. With adaptive, they're unknown. That's the reason we can't take an activity to solve it, is we don't know what that activity might be right now. Technical change requires typically changes in structures, systems, procedures, whereas adaptive requires changes in priorities, habits, beliefs, loyalties. Authority figures or experts make technical change happen, whereas with adaptive, it's often people on the edge, maybe people even outside of the organization. Sometimes people that are at the center of the organization have a little myopia. They're just so used to seeing what they're seeing that they can't always discern the changes that need to take place. Scope is a difference. With technical, the scope of the problem is typically within the confines, within someone's job description to do this, to take care of it, to make a phone call, within the goals of the organization, whereas adaptive change is typically outside of the organization. Technical is more short-term, adaptive is more long-term. In technical, we maintain the norms. We're fixing a problem so that the tradition of the institution can continue. With adaptive, typically there will be disruption, as Jessica mentioned earlier. This whole program really centers on this idea of disruption. In terms of stating the problem, it's usually very clear with technical. There's water in the basement. With adaptive, it requires learning to even be able to state the issue. If you want to pull up the, yeah, thank you. The primary skills are technical, or I tend to refer to expertise, that it involves expertise of the individual who's doing the work, whereas the person doing adaptive change involves intrapersonal and interpersonal skills. Those are actually more important skills than the technical expertise or knowledge that a person has. Another way of saying this is that people who work in adaptive change are more revered or important for what they can make happen as opposed to what they know about something. The initial task involves steps for implementation. Initially, with adaptive change, we're just trying to frame the problem. The initial energy is around a budget. Oh, I wonder, okay, how great of a website can we get? How big can our budget be? And there's excitement about trying to get money approved. Money's approved, excitement dies down. Whereas the excitement with adaptive can come from identifying patterns. Oh, we learned that this has happened before, or we learned that this other organization has faced this. We're not alone. Just identifying themes and patterns that are out there. The process is typically finite, sequential, and technical, and with adaptive, it can be iterative. We experiment, we ask what we learn from that, we design another experiment. And sometimes I even like to use the word exploration rather than experiment. That can help people when they think about the church. We're doing scientific experiments on the church. Well, we're exploring things. In terms of external threats, we haven't mentioned the pandemic yet. I think people in other parts of the country went through it also, right? The pandemic that we experienced was actually a global pandemic, so we all experienced this particular thing. And there are many new threats that it uncovered, many injustices, that were revealed, light shed on these things. And often with technical work that you do, we're really trying to protect an organization from this. Whereas with adaptive, we're really saying, okay, there's some things going on that need to be addressed, and perhaps they've never been addressed before. So we want to expose the organization to some of these trends, some of these conversations that are happening outside of our own congregation or institution. We orient new people to current norms, to expectations with adaptive change. And when with conflict, we're just trying to restore order with technical, and we're trying to regulate the heat. A little bit of conflict, differences of opinion actually can help create more urgency and adaptive change for the whole organization to realize something needs to be done, something needs to happen here. So hopefully that has been helpful. That is a chart that I developed from one of Heifetz's books on in this particular area. I think at this point, maybe I will ask that you move into some small groups of about whatever number would bring us to 4 people each, I think, Jessica. And if you would share an example of a technical change that you feel like you as an individual or your institution is involved in, and perhaps a strategic change. We're going to save identifying adaptive changes and sharing those for a little while we continue to kind of get a handle on these first 2. So if you don't mind each taking a couple of moments, let's take so groups of about 4 people each, share just 2 or 3 minutes each. So we'll come back in about 12 minutes, okay, from the sharing. Any questions about the groups, what you're being asked to do? To share an example of a technical and an example of a strategic change. And if you can't come up with it, that's fine. And no one is ever forced to share something that's too personal. So thank you. We welcome persons back to our seminar on adaptive change. You must have got along pretty well with the people in your small group. No one came back early, so that's always a good sign that you're getting along with others in those conversations. As we talked about in the beginning, it can be helpful to think about individual examples when we think about institutional examples. And sometimes it's difficult to really begin thinking about what is an example of an adaptive challenge within your organization. So after talking about this for a number of years, one of the tools that I use as a way into this is to begin thinking about a potential adaptive challenge for yourself. And so I would like to kind of guide us through a little exercise. This would be the document of developing a personal mission statement. And sometimes this is called an elevator speech. Sometimes you're asked to develop a 60-second speech about what your organization is. The purpose of this is to design a 60-second speech about a challenge that you are personally experiencing that can give insight into your own personal mission statement. Not a life mission statement, but more of a mission statement for the short term. And again, this is an example of this language, these thoughts, I think, can be an entry point into thinking about the adaptive challenges that institutions experience. So if you would just jot down some notes as I walk through this, and then in a moment, you'll be asked to share whatever you came up with, to the extent that you're willing, with another person. And the goal then is to be able to share that within 60 seconds. So we don't need long answers, just a phrase or a sentence at the most. So this first question I know may sound odd, but it works in terms of a starting point. So the first question is, what belief do you hold that if it were untrue would cause your world to begin to unravel? What belief do you hold that you assume it's true, but if it were not, this would really begin to cause your world, your ministry to unravel, to come apart? Give you a moment to think about that and to jot that down. Seeing several look back up, might be ready for the next part. If not, you have time. So if that is a belief that you hold, then, and assuming it is true, what purpose does that belief give rise to about the one thing that you really should be doing more of as an individual? What single purpose to your life is most connected to that one thing? Or another way to say it is, since you do believe that is true, and it's very important to you, what does that belief suggest in terms of the major activity of what you should be doing as a leader, as a minister, as an individual? And do try to limit it to one thing. If you're still working on that, that's fine. For those who are ready, list 2 or 3 things that get in the way of you doing that one thing that you just named. So you've just named a single activity that you really should be doing more of based upon your belief. What are a few things that hamper you from doing that? For those just coming to this part, try to list a couple of things that get in the way. For those who've been doing that, list several if you'd like. As you have made that list, then look over the list of those things that get in the way and check the one that seems to get in the way most often or has the greatest potential, to prevent you from doing the thing that you identified that you need to be doing more of. Check just one of those that gets in the way most often. And finally, is there something that you can do to overcome that, to begin exploring, to begin developing more of an attitude to doing that thing? So as an example, as you look at your list, you should have 4 items that are phrases, no more than a sentence. And when you put those together, you're able to share that within 60 seconds. I'm happy to give an example if I were answering these questions today. The belief that I hold true and really rest on is that God is still active in the world, that God's Spirit is very active in the world. The thing then that I need to be doing more of is creating space for God's work, for God's Spirit to influence and to lead and to change us. A couple of things that get in the way of that are administrative tasks and conflict, but typically conflict over hot button issues seems to be the one thing that dealing with that gets in the way of doing this. And so what I need to do going forward is just to continue to emphasize mission first and God's ability to enhance that mission over everything else. Done. So as you think again about your 4 things, what's the belief that you hold? What does it give rise to in terms of an activity? What's something that gets in the way of that? and what's something you could begin to try to do, explore to do more of that thing. Does that make sense? Any questions? In a moment, I'm going to ask you to share that in just groups of 2. Sometimes when I have done this in a large setting, we do several rounds of dyads, several rounds of persons sharing this with one other person. I find someone in the group that can whistle or has a whistle. After 2 minutes, we blow the whistle, find a new partner, blow the whistle, find a new partner, and just keep doing that. I think we'll probably do this twice today, but you'll have 2 minutes and it will seem abrupt, but so share yours in 60 seconds, give the person you're with an opportunity to share theirs in 60 seconds. You'll be brought back into the large group, and then we'll do it one more time. Any questions? Work on that 60 seconds, of speech. If you're not getting through, means to kind of pare that down. I know that many of you today are leaders and probably taking notes, not just for your own edification, but you're taking notes thinking, I'm going to do this in my own setting, in my own place. I certainly encourage you to do that, borrow anything that you'd like. If you're doing this in your own setting, again, sometimes I have done that 5 or 6 rounds with people, finding a new person, and there's an energy, that kind of just begins to grow. People discover they can actually do this. They find that they're adjusting it a little bit as on the fly as they go. They get better at it, so there's confidence in that. It's a nice exercise to do with individuals several times. Then sometimes what I have done in retreat settings or the like is to then have them do the same thing and thinking about their institution. What's a belief that you feel like this institution holds? What then, if that's our belief, what should the institution be doing more of? What gets in the way of that for all of us as a congregation, as an institution? What's something that we can experiment with moving forward? When I have done it kind of starting out that way with the institution, it just seems much more difficult for people to get into that without doing it for themselves individually. And so that's why I kind of start with this personal mission statement, that seems like, oh, I thought we were talking about adaptive change for organizations. But again, that's a way in to having a better conversation about that. I want to move along then in terms of the agenda, make a few comments, and then I'll bring up a couple of adaptive changes for us to all to look at as a larger group. In terms of identifying these adaptive challenges, whether for individuals or whether for groups, some of the questions that can be helpful in doing that is simply that, what do you struggle with? What does the organization struggle with continually? What's an item that it seems like it's continually on our agenda and we just never get it solved? Another question for individuals, what keeps you up at night? That's one of my favorite questions to ask anyone. What's that thing, hopefully it's not, but what's that thing that has the capacity to kind of wake you up and you have trouble going back That's probably then either God working through our dreams, or unconscious at work, in terms of, okay, God may be saying, I want you to work on this thing. Find a way to explore it so that it's less stressful, or find a way to do something about it. What problems do you not have answers for is another question. What would you like to tackle, but you don't know where to start? So those are questions that you can ask your group. And sometimes it takes 2 or 3 different angles of questions to get the group really thinking about that. At its core, over the years, one of the most helpful things that I learned in my own training of this from Heifetz, and in working with others, is that the core of an adaptive challenge is a conflict of values. When you finally get to a place where you feel like, okay, what's really going on here is that these 2 individuals, these 2 subgroups, this congregation, there's a conflict of values here. We avow, sometimes it's as simple as valuing harmony over, potential disruption that would take place if you really looked at this thing. Classic values in terms of worship, in the worship wars that took place, that some viewed worship as meditation and just would cringe, at drums being brought into the sanctuary, but there was another group viewing worship as celebration. Not, both true, nothing wrong with that. But if you can get to the core of something like that, you can begin to at least have a conversation about those things. So at its core, almost every adaptive challenge has a conflict of values. They also, there's another thing, but I want to lead into it with this question. What's something that people in the US, many, many millions of people in the US do every week, but it would radically change their life? They do something every week, and if this activity that they engage in came true, it would radically change their life. Anyone? They purchase something. What is it that they purchase that might radically change their life?
Like, you mean like a car, for example? If you didn't have a car and you purchased a car, it could radically change your life?
Yeah.
I'm not sure what you're going for.
Not exactly what I was going for. I appreciate the response. This is cheaper than a car. You can purchase it for $1 in many places.
A lottery ticket?
A lottery ticket. Would this not radically change a person's life if this came true? So it's a little simplistic, but it can be a helpful thought that people don't always resist change per se, but they do avoid loss, something that they feel like where they're going to lose something in the process. And again, that's a little simplistic, but it can be helpful to think about that we don't avoid change of all kinds, of all natures. There are some changes that we welcome. So in adaptive work, we're trying to get to the other side of that and have the whole leadership team, the whole group kind of realize that we're going to go through this. There will be some changes, but we're doing this because it will improve our situation. It's also helpful in the midst of that, though, to talk about losses. There are times when there are win-win situations. Typically, adaptive change is not one of those. So that can block the process. You get to a point in adaptive change where people are kind of not wanting to go further because they feel like they may lose something. Here's some examples of losses that people may experience. They may have a loss of identity in that organization. They may have a loss of reputation, that if this thing is done, they won't have as much influence as they used to have. They may have a loss of some discretionary time. It may involve some really hard work to reach out into that community and spend some of their Saturday mornings doing something differently. There may be a loss of comfort. It's much easier many times for a congregation to give a handout, to actually engage a houseless person, that may be on the street. There may be that loss of comfort, of time, loss of status, maybe loss of security. People feel like, if our church does this, are we risking our assets in doing this? A loss of benefits, loss of freedom, loss of responsibility, loss of predictability. There's all kinds of losses that people may experience. To me, that's typically a conversation maybe about a third of the way into the process that that happens. Toward the end of kind of identifying the adaptive change, you get to the conflicted values. But kind of before that, there can be a really helpful conversation to really start to put on the table, what are some losses, that if we really explore this, some changes take place that we're going to go through. At this point, I'd like to, I shared with you some adaptive challenges examples. Some of these come from, a few of these come from Craig Van Gelder, who also teaches in this area. So I share some of these with permission from him, and some of these come from my own work in terms of adaptive challenge. And I think I'm just going to maybe copy and paste one of these, but also first to say, here are 4 elements that I have found that are typically in adaptive challenges. There we go. Let me rephrase that are helpful if they are in an adaptive challenge statement. But typically, most adaptive challenge statements do not include these 4 pieces. But a really, really good one will. So in that one sentence, there's a sense of where they have been and how they have got there in that one sentence or paragraph. There's a sense of a desired vision or hope. There's a sense of the obstacles to that vision. And there's a hint of what maybe are the conflicting values. So let's look at one of these. I'm just pulling the first one off of the example sheet, and I'm going to copy that and put it in the chat room. Again, you have access to this entire document from the link that Jessica shared with you. So let me read this one and then ask those 4 questions. We are preparing fewer and fewer pastors for ministry because we have created an approach to graduate theological education that for many is not affordable or financially sustainable, which is also increasingly out of step with many of the next generation of leaders. First question, what words in there hint at where they have been? Anyone?
Expensive theological education.
Mm-hmm. And that's probably also an obstacle, right? Any other obstacles in there?
It could be interpreted in different ways, but the term out of step.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Ursula. Yes. Is there a vision or hope in there?
There's a hope that we will prepare more pastors for ministry. A hope that we can have more
Mm-hmm.
prepared pastors.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of implied, yeah, there. Perhaps in my mind could be stated a little more strongly, in that, so that there is a hope that you hope to continue, but doing something better. And then any conflicting values that are hinted at or not?
Something with the next generation is hinted at.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Different generations, different needs, trends that are going on. Great work. Let me copy and paste another one. I'm going to copy and paste the third one. Do another example of this. And I'll read it out loud as well. Our congregation has yet to develop genuine relationships with the other in our neighborhood, where there is a reciprocity of mutual sharing and learning, but we are not really sure we want to do this. Where have they been?
Doesn't look like they've been there. Looks like they've wanted to.
Mm-hmm. What's the hope or vision?
Mutuality.
Yes. So they've learned something. There's a hint here that they've done some exploration of this already to be able to name the need for reciprocity with those whom they minister with. So that's very helpful to see, that specificity of vision coming out of this. What's the obstacle?
Whether they really want to do it or not.
Yeah.
Not sure.
Yeah, we're not sure we want to do this.
We want to do that.
I mean, imagine what could happen. We could actually reach out to the people. They might show up in our congregation. Then what? That could be really scary. I'm sorry, someone?
Individualism, own group.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. Yes.
They get points for honesty.
Yes, right. What's the conflicting values?
Well, it might be that the conflicting values might be what we think is important, might not be what they think is important. And so we might have to give something up, or we might have to adjust our thinking for somebody else.
Thank you.
I think it's also an us and them mentality, just the wording that is used here, seeing someone else as other rather than us, being all, people that have needs and desires and hopes and dreams and struggles.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if they are also just afraid of their own vulnerability to go that next step, to say, hey, we have to share about ourselves too. And do we really want to hear what the other has to say about us? That's scary.
Nice. Thank you for that.
Well, there's also a fear of rejection, right? That will reach out to the people in our community or our neighborhood, and they won't want to be a part of us, or don't want to interact with us.
These are great insights. I would encourage you, that's all we're going to do as a large group, but this is one of the very helpful ways in my mind is to look at sample adaptive challenges so you have the document available to you. And if you're exploring this with a group, to do this process though and look for these 4 things in every one. Try to identify, and you begin to develop a pattern then for how to name these. Sense of where we've been, sense of hope, what's the obstacle, what's the conflicting values. You see, this is very similar to the process of that personal mission statement, but it's just a little bit different pathway into this. So what I would like for you to do in the next moment, just does this give rise to any adaptive challenge in your organization? Take a moment, jot something down that may come to you. And again, there's no way to kind of get this perfect, if you will, the first time. You know, it really does take iterations. So just jot down whatever comes to mind. Jessica, in a moment, I think we'll do dyads again. Maybe 4 minutes, give everybody just 2 minutes each to share something they wrote down. Anyone need more time to maybe jot something down? Raise your hand. And again, you're just sharing the glimpse of an idea. Any questions about what you're being asked to share? Just share what you wrote down with one other person, 2 minutes each. So if you've been kind of taking time, somebody, 2 minutes, and then it's the other person's turn to share, and then you'll be beamed back in. Jessica, do your magic. Thank you. Well, thank you for coming back today. I appreciate that. One of the things that was said in our small group is that sometimes the vision that congregations have is just a return to something. And just a statement, and if you're working on identifying an adaptive challenge, getting that in writing, one of the things I really encourage is do a rewriting of that after every exploration, every experiment, sometimes after every meeting. So you may begin with that sense of a vision, but then that vision can change as you begin to explore, gather information. Remember, all that gathering information is to help you frame the issue, which means naming the adaptive challenge. So just, let the group say, we'll probably have 12 iterations of this before we get something that we really want to explore more with. So I just wanted to name that. Anyone want to share with a larger group an adaptive challenge that you thought about?
One of the first ones I thought of was our region has a camping program, and one of our camping facilities is up for sale. And so it's going to force us to do some changing. And I thought, and there's a lot of people with opinions about how things used to be and how do we get back to the way they were. And that whole idea of how do we decide what our vision really is, and what is the way to implement the vision within the parameters that we have. That was one of the ones I thought of.
That sounds like a great one, Jennifer. Well framed already in terms of the adaptive work. And it could be done, technically, probably something like that, but it would not be nearly done as well if there's not some sense. Go ahead.
Well, the problem with doing it technically then, and you've got the experts telling everyone what to do, right? Rather than the buy-in together of it being our decision. And I think that only sets us up to fail.
Yeah, I agree. I'm just saying the tendency sometimes, is for groups to do that. Another tool that I've done, actually, I did this with the board at Green Lake. Some of you have heard of Green Lake, and I did this particular exercise with them, where they were at a point where they wanted to think about the future in some ways. So we did something called rotating flip charts, where you have 3 or 4 people at a different flip chart, and you just start generating things, and then you rotate and comment on one another's ideas. But then one of the learnings more recently than when Heifetz wrote his original text is that many problems are bundled. There are technical, strategic, and adaptive aspects of some of the major problems that we identify. So then the next thing that we did in that particular group, we separated them. We categorized the things that were on the flip chart as technical, strategic, adaptive, and then they formed some groups. Some of them, especially the technical, again, could be given right to a committee. That's the nature of technical. We assign it within the system. And then there were, they worked on a couple of strategic, and then the group, worked on a couple of adaptive. So that's an exercise that also you can do, is begin with sharing any problems, any things that need to be addressed at all, and then begin to categorize them. We have about 5 or 7 minutes left, and I want to share just one more concept and then just see if there are any burning questions about this. This is a bold statement. I don't make many of these, but I make this one, that I've really never seen this work well without a team involved and really a team guiding the work. And I know that, I think earlier Jessica mentioned that the better groups that have been working through the reshaping process are those that have a team involved. So think about a search committee. If your organization were forming a search committee and you wanted every voice represented on that search committee from your organization, you with me? All the different subgroups, I like to use the word voice, every common voice represented on a search committee. Well, that's the same type of team that you need for adaptive change. You need every voice really represented in that team that's going to work on this. And there are 4 criteria I have. And if anyone has any of these 4, I'm sorry, they're not invited. No single issue persons. You know what I mean? Every time you have a conversation with this person, they've got one fix and you hear it every single time you talk to them. That is not helpful for adaptive change. Number 2, they do have the best interests of the organization at heart. They care about this place. There's a passion for this place. Number 3, they have some influence. If we're thinking about, them and representation, I don't use that language, they're not actually representing that subgroup, but it's just, we need a person that's in each of those subgroups. And people then that are respected, have some influence with members of the institution or congregation. And finally, people that are generally positive. I sometimes call this no curmudgeon rule. There was a study done, I think, that people that say 2 positive things to 1 negative are healthy, and those that don't are not. I know that's simplistic, but that was kind of the general finding. And so again, this next statement is strong, but if you have a single person on the committee that has a single one of these things, it can destroy the work. So then the question, what happens if you can't have all the voices? You can't find somebody that's in that group kind of with that voice. I still say you can't put that person on the committee, and then you find ways though to get input from that particular subgroup as you go along. And again, some examples of what this group would do at the outset. Field trip is my favorite. If you can get this group, to go on a field trip to explore this issue that either another group is having the same struggle or they've made some headway, ideally you can find somewhere that's made a little bit of a headway, has a reputation for addressing this, and just say, can we spend a day? Talking to some of your leaders, seeing what you're doing in the community, seeing a worship service, whatever it may be, to experience an event, and then have a little bit of time with some dialogue with the leaders of that organization. Other things that you can do, just read something together. I probably would not suggest reading one of HIFET's books as a group, unless it is an academic group, but you ought to do that if you're, on the team. Reading scriptures, what are all the scriptures that give rise to this? What are the pericopes? What are the texts that just make us think and then explore, generate them, then explore them, explore 2 a week, meet every week, meet every other week for a while, interview people, do an observation. None of those things that I just said will fix it, right? They're all just gathering information to be able to frame the issue. Last thing about the team, don't lead it yourself. If you're the pastor, you're involved, but it will help if there's a different spokesperson, sharing kind of the learnings of the group to the congregation. And second thing, they have no power. They absolutely no power if somebody asks. They have the power to recommend something, but that's it. They cannot make a decision for the congregation. So don't lead it, and they have no power. That'll also help you moving forward. Just a couple of minutes. Any question? This is a 5,000-foot view of this thing, and I tried to just give you the real learnings, that I've picked up over the last 15 years of this. But so dig further if you think this is helpful. But a question?
You have mentioned that there is no win-win solution in these adaptive challenges. And so, if there is no win-win solution, then in my context, then if we have this multi-generational leaders, and so the solution that they have come up with just two extreme one, whether you quit or just you stay quiet. And so, yeah.
Yeah, so when you have a dichotomy like that, I always try to find a third way, a third or fourth way. So when you're having a conflict, you always try to expand the perspectives from 2 to 3 or 4. And then with those 3 or 4 groups, the first thing you try to do is some common ground. What is there one thing that we do all care about? And can we name that first? That we all do care about this congregation. We do all care about this denomination. Let's start with that. Okay, what's the second thing that we all care about? We care about the next generation. We care about the current generation. So we name that, we put that down. And you just begin to allow that common ground, to spread. And then you say, okay, given this, let's do some exploration of some congregations that are involving the next generation. I don't know, it helps, but yeah, there is no win-win, but there is typically common ground. No win-win means that there's no losses. That's all I meant by that. And there are losses.
Jeff, you said this is the 5,000-foot view or overall thing. But how could a person really delve into this to understand it more?
I do think reading the book helps, and maybe reading the book, create a small group of persons that want to further explore adaptive change, then go through that text together. I'm sure there are other seminars and, places out there as well. HIFET's gets $40,000 a day, so I wouldn't start there. And I don't know what you paid, for this today. My hunch is it wasn't that. But I'm sorry, Dan, I don't kind of have a group to say, yeah, this is a consultant or this is But I think, you know, you're all leaders, you all understand organizations. I would just say, get the text, start reading through it, you know, yourself. And I never mind talking about things, you know, make a little progress, invite me in. I'm happy to have a conversation with people. So.
Thank you.
And I got training from HIVIS from a grant. Just want to say that ABC didn't pay $40,000 either. So it was completely free. So.
We're very blessed to have your leadership, Jeff.
Thank you, Mary. Appreciate you. Mary and I have known each other for 30 years or 25 years somewhere. Yeah. She did an excellent job with the American Baptist Church in Ohio.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Wood, so much. This was just incredibly helpful. So much good information and ways to apply it. And fits right along with the Reshaping church process. And like I said earlier, we have a number of folks here who are in that process with their churches now. And so I hope that there's some helpful things in that too. I'm going to send out, as soon as this video gets processed and we get that uploaded, I'll send out an email to everyone that was here today with the documents that were used today, as well as a link. And then I have some other articles about adaptive leadership too that I can link to that just as extra resources if people are interested in those. Thank you so much, Dr. Woods. Really amazing, really thankful for this time together. Thank you all for being here and for your insights and for your ministry. Just a quick reminder that our next Reshaping Church conversation will be on Thursday, August 19th at the same time, and we will have Reverend Dr. Roger Nishioka discussing faith formation in times of crisis. If you're not registered for that already, you can do that at the link I just put in the chat. And that's also where you can find out more information about the Reshaping Church 2022 cohort and sign up to attend some of the open houses or share those links with other pastors or lay leaders that you know that might be interested in Reshaping Church 2022. So will you join me in saying a big thank you to Dr. Woods? Thank you so much.
Thank you. I enjoyed our conversation today, and may God's grace be upon you and guide you into the future as you work together.
Thank you all so much. Stay safe and healthy. We'll see you again.